Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this amazing event, the launch of our anti-racism strategy for the East of England. My name is Tendai Grace Ndongwe, and I'll be your chair this afternoon. I'm so pleased that we have a packed agenda with some awesome speakers and amazing delegates that have taken the time out to be here today. So thank you so much as we start our event. So we hope that this event will energize you, will challenge you, and empower you. Ultimately, the goal for our session this afternoon is to officially launch our anti-racism strategy for the East of England, to provide some context and understanding of what it means to be an anti-racist organisation and a person, to get some personal and collective responsibility to achieving race equality, and equipping you with the necessary tools and resources to help drive change. The pace of this event will be fast, and we have a lot of ground to cover, and we hope to be finished by 4 o'clock or a little after. But today we're really lucky to have some esteemed guests and who are looking forward to, and we're really looking forward to hearing what they have to say and their endorsement as part of this launch event. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Jeff Buggle, our Regional Finance Director, to help kick us off by setting the scene around why anti-racism is a key regional priority for this region. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much. So this is a real privilege to be able to launch our anti-racism webinar. And I want to begin today by thinking about the time 73 years ago on the 22nd of June 1948, when the Empire Windrush docked in our region at Tilbury. It brought workers from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago and other islands to help fill the post-war labour shortages and help rebuild the country. This flow of willing, committed individuals with high aspirations continued until the late 1960s, and their experiences are part of our society today. There are two recorded histories that give us an insight into that moment. Edwin Hilton Hall, on board the Empire Windrush on the 22nd of June, recalled, "As we passed through the white cliffs of Dover, it was beyond imagination. I came out having something to eat in the mess hall and saw this crowd with cameramen at the docks, and I was waving my teacup, waving to be noticed." However, later, a student nurse recalling their arrival in 1969 said, "We went onto the ward as student nurses. It was a very hostile environment, very hostile, very rude, very ignorant about the rest of the world. There was this man who kept calling us monkeys, and one day he said, 'You black something' to me. And I said, 'Listen, I'm sick of you calling me names. Tell me something I don't know.' And he stood up and said, 'What do you mean?' I said, 'I'm aware I'm black. I've been black for 21 years. And this changed everything for me and for him. He started to ask more decent questions. Despite the fact that there's been a wide range of races and ethnicities within Britain, probably since Roman times, the numbers were relatively small and the understanding and integration seems to have been very limited. The arrival, therefore, of workers from around the world forced what's been seen as latent prejudice into the open. Despite encountering a level of prejudice and obstacles, which I find shocking, they persevered and helped establish and develop what we know now as the NHS. It is easy to dismiss these situations as something that happened a long time ago. I'm not sure that's the case. I was talking to a really good friend of mine who was born in Britain from Pakistani parents the other night. He was walking home from work after England won the football against Germany, and a woman slurred at him, "I'm proud to be white and British because we're better than people like you." That's slightly ironic because the first England goal was scored by Raheem Sterling, who was born to Jamaican parents, and the fact he's England's top goal scorer. But as we all know, never let facts get in the way of prejudice. This illustrates what we did not develop alongside the growth of the NHS over 73 years since Windrush, was a real integration in a new society. We know that there are many unacceptable experiences still, more than 50 years since that student nurse on the ward encountered the ignorance and prejudice which damage and impact so unfairly on any citizen of colour. Addressing this is so important. Research shows that equal opportunities and discrimination are the second and third most important predictors of patient satisfaction. The findings of the staff survey for the NHS in 2019 illustrates the scale of the challenges we face. Approximately 20% of the 1.4 million people who work in the NHS are from ethnic minorities. 46% of hospital doctors are from a minority ethnic group backgrounds. 21% of nurses and midwives. But there are only 8 minority ethnic chief executives. There are only 10 chairs. Only 16% of medical directors and 10 executive directors of nursing. Only 6% of very senior managers are from minority ethnic group backgrounds, and only 7% minority ethnic group board representation. In my own discipline of NHS finance, I see a workforce where 25% are from a minority ethnic background, but where only 8% are currently directors. Despite this, I'm talking to you today, however, with optimism and a sense of hope. I believe we're in a position to make a change within our own part of the country and our own services. We've started a real conversation about this within our region. A number of our chief executives and chairs have spent time over the last summer considering the reality of racism, recalibrating what we understand of where we are in 2021, and then considering what action sits within our own control. For many of us, this has included a real recognition that just wanting to do the right thing, seeking to be a good person, and believing I'm not being racist is not good enough. Beginning this journey to equality through listening has been important for many, and certainly for me. I've had conversations with colleagues over the last year which have stopped me in my tracks, made me think and pause and reevaluate my own actions and those of others. They've introduced me to new ways of describing things and thinking about things. I've tried to explore colleagues' lived experience. And yes, I've said the wrong thing at times, but I think it's through understanding and support of the colleague I've been speaking with that I've learned so much. We have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable. If it feels uncomfortable, then you're probably doing the right thing. I recognise that as a white man in a privileged position has meant I haven't faced any barriers purely based on the colour of my skin. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to call out and challenge any racism we see. This learning and understanding is ongoing and will continue to shape and adjust how we all think. Personally, I will keep reevaluating what I've learned and what to do next. And the next steps are the key issues for our session today and this strategy. This is about action as well as self-awareness and testing and adjusting our own behaviour and approaches. The biggest responsibility of senior leaders is to keep setting ambitions, ask questions about progress, and to ensure that they behave in ways which create real change. We must be willing to admit to mistakes because mistakes will happen. However, we must learn from these mistakes. And we cannot let go of this agenda. And it cannot be seen to be something that is fashionable. It has to remain the top of all of our agendas. We have to constantly seek to ask ourselves, are we doing enough? Are we seeing improvements? Does this feel more inclusive? But we have to do this in a compassionate way and a way that calls people into the conversation and not excludes them. The East of England Regional Leadership Team has committed to a small number of priorities over the next 9 months, and anti-racism progress is at the top of that list. Our regional director, Anne Radmore, is wholly committed to this and wants to see genuine progress against the strategy by April 22. She's asked every NHS organisation to consider its own version of the strategy and the action plan which must flow from it. We are talking to our colleagues in local government about how anti-racism work can link to their plans. I have a real personal determination which says, on my watch, I stopped and paid attention. We did not walk by on the other side, but walked towards the issue of racism, and we together took action, which made change happen. Thank you for listening.
Wow, that was amazing, Jeff. Thank you so much for setting the scene and just opening it up on behalf of Anne Radmore, Regional Director. That was just phenomenal and spoke spoke so deeply to the passion that sits underneath our strategy. Thank you very much, Jo.
When I started in NHS, there's not many people that look like me.
Growing up, I would be walking to school and people used to open the windows and say, "Go home, Paki." And I was 8.
We do, whether we like it or not, exist in a state of structural racism.
I've always felt I have to work a little bit harder than my colleagues.
Slavery was meant to have ended years ago, but that thinking is still very much with us.
You know, there's this saying back in Trinidad, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything.
There's something that you feel in the room sometimes. We have conversations about equality and diversity where you look around the room and it's a sea of white faces.
I think for several years I'm the only senior matron who looks like me. A few years after that we've got another. So there's only 2 of us who's from diverse background, and we try very much to support each other. Because of that, you make yourself work harder, you give a bit more. I don't have to keep on proving myself, but you do as someone from diverse background.
I never thought progression was for people that looked like me. It was only when I started working in the clinical commissioning group and my manager said, "Shama, I want to talk to you about progression." I was thinking back to being in society growing up, but not necessarily part of it. So I thought, how can I climb a ladder that I don't even think I'm part of, actually?
That's where I think we need to start from changing the mindsets, particularly among the white people. There needs to be a partnership between the black and the white. In terms of talent, you've got BME people with equal, if not more qualifications, because there are 200 million Nigerians. I'll use myself perhaps as an example. I said I'm a professor of clinical pharmacy and pharmacy practice, but I have been the only member of my senior management team for the last 10, 11 years.
A couple of years ago, I was on the National Ready Now programme, which is for senior minority ethnic leaders. And it was a very difficult programme for me because what it did is it challenged exactly that I was leaving my identity at home thinking, right, now today's Monday, so I have to go to the NHS to work, and now it's Saturday, so I have to cook some Asian food and wear my shalwar kameez. It helped me to understand that I can't be the best I am if I don't bring all of me to work. And actually, what's that done today for me as a leader is I feel much more integrated in myself as a person. I can be a better leader, I can support other people, and for white majority managers and white majority leaders to be able to be comfortable and feel safe in addressing issues and supporting minority ethnic staff.
When I first started at Ipswich Hospital, the chief exec there, Nick, gave a talk at the first induction, and the expression that he used is the care that you walk past is the care that you accept.
The NHS has to create an environment that enables people to feel, that their skills, their experience would make a difference, but give them the confidence to be able to, take that step. It's about certainly at the most senior levels in our organizations, people showing and our leaders showing that commitment. That includes me. I'm a senior leader. Yes, even as a minority senior leader, I still have to be able to demonstrate and show that, commitment to addressing any inequalities that exist.
Trauma is hard to explain because unless you've lived it, you can't fully understand what it is like. You can't. I was managing a team. I recognized pretty early that I had one particular person who didn't like when I gave out tasks. She didn't like when it came from me. We were both in the office together. She then proceeds to walk around the desk, and then she proceeds to stand next to me. And she holds a disinfectant spray bottle to my head like a gun, like this. She then proceeds to spray me with the disinfectant. Disinfectant in my hair, on the side of my face, on my glasses, all over my desk. She then walked back over to her desk. I was so angry. I was angry because I wanted to fight. And I know that if I fought, I would be the issue. I walked out of that office. I went to the bathroom for 15 minutes. I cried and cried and cried and cried. And there was a big investigation. It took almost 9 months. The person still works in the organization. I've had to have therapy over this. A microaggression is part of racism. It's part of the structure.
When people infer that you don't quite know what you're doing, or you're not quite competent to make decisions, or who are you to tell me what to do, even though I am eminently qualified.
When I walk into a room, it's very easy to tell that I'm a black man. But when it comes to your work being valued, it always feels that you just could do a little bit more.
I'd never looked at a job and thought, oh, but has a white person ever done that job? Is any characteristic that just makes up who I am gonna be something which could potentially hold me back in any way?
As a diverse person, I don't expect the world to change for me. The change is within me. But I would ask my colleagues and the patients is just take hold and be aware of your personal biases and actually outwardly stop it if you hear it. If we all do that, then it will ripple across. It will ripple across nationally in NHS, in any organization.
Absolutely, I think the will is there, but that needs to turn into demonstrable actions, and I think it needs to be something where the space is created for people to have those conversations and people to recognise the importance of that.
People are different, accept the difference, celebrate the difference, and enjoy the difference, and that makes the world a richer and a better place, in my opinion.
So you might think that what you've just seen is shocking, but is it shocking because we weren't aware it was happening, or is it shocking because we're hearing people's truth? After 6 years worth of res data, I suppose the question is, can we still be shocked? And the most recent results in our region show there have been some improvements across organisations, which is fantastic. And I know people are working incredibly hard, but there are still some significant issues that we need to tackle. So when we're talking about disciplinary processes, for example, BME staff are 1.53 times more likely to enter a disciplinary process compared to white staff. 32% of our BME staff are experiencing bullying and harassment, and only 5.9% of our board members are from a BME background, and that's compared to a BME workforce of around 20%. So the goal in becoming anti-racist employers is to make sure these experiences become the exception rather than the norm. And as John Amici says, culture is defined by the worst behaviour tolerated. So let's get on to the framework. If I could have the next slide, please, Ruth. What we're focused on really is meaningful action. This first slide gives you a bit of history of how this work originated. So our regional HRD network identified race equality as a key priority, and this was prior to the pandemic. What's happened since has put this work into stark focus, and rightly so.
You can see from this roadmap that a number of senior leaders from across the region have been engaged and signed off this work. And it's been built in partnership with a number of stakeholders, including HR directors, our EDI leads, staff network chairs, our trade union colleagues, and so many more. And we're so grateful to every one of you for giving us your time and your commitment. So we've used the data that we have to focus on some of the more persistent and damaging issues faced by our staff. And we've ensured that our interventions are evidence-based approaches. And they also recognise that good practice that's already making a difference. Like I said, there's a lot of great practice out there, but we know that more needs to be done. We need to make sure it's happening everywhere, that we share our learning with each other and we accelerate the change that's needed. So before I go into just some of the key components of the framework, if I could have the next slide, please, Ruth. I just want to talk a little bit about what it means to be anti-racist. And the first thing we have to do is recognise that we have a problem. Racism exists and discrimination is built into our systems and our processes. It's not just about individual isolated cases. We really have to educate ourselves on what racism is and be open to experiences that are going to challenge our view of racism. We have to have diversity in our decision making, and we have to address the lack of representation. And we've heard about that already. But in order to do this, we have to actively make our systems and processes more equitable by opening up paths of opportunity to those affected by discrimination and racism. And our policies have to reflect this anti-racism stance. So if I could have the next slide, please, Ruth. So our framework focuses on 4 key components. So the first one is around education and commitment. And this is really about educating ourselves. We need to understand how people experience racism and the impact that it's having on their health and well-being. We want to commit to equipping people, not only with the knowledge, but with the tools to become active anti-racist. And we want to support people to confront racial injustices, even when it's uncomfortable, and it very much so is. The second area is around civility and respect. There's stacks of research out there that show the impact of incivility and disrespect, and these impacts are far-reaching. So there's a personal impact on people's health and well-being. There's an organisational impact on things such as turnover and absence, and more importantly, and just as importantly, there's an impact on patient care. So we really must support our line managers to lead with empathy and create psychologically safe environments that allow people to share their truth. And when they do, we must take swift action. The third area is around representation and decision making. So we need to develop our upcoming leaders of the future and ensure that equality and inclusion is a key competence of all leaders. Leading with compassion and inclusion is the goal. And just as important is ensuring that diversity of thought in our decision making. We've seen firsthand from the pandemic how it's vital in providing effective care for all our communities. And then the fourth area is around our policies. So not only does our terminology need to reflect the needs of today's workforce, we also have to remove barriers to education and opportunity. We have to overhaul our recruitment and promotion practices, and I'm really grateful to have Roger here, who's going to talk you through some of that work a bit later. And we have to reduce the disparity of experience. So behind these 4 key components, it's a set of detailed commitments and actions broken down by employer, ICS, and regional responsibility. And our regional team and all our ICS leaders have signed up to this approach. So today we're really calling on all employers, leaders and individuals in the region to make a public commitment to this work. And just as a final thought, one of the challenges I get a lot is about culture taking time to change. And yes, I do believe that it can take time. However, you could also argue that the pandemic has shown us what we can achieve when we're all working towards the same goal. By taking individual and collective responsibility, we can create a movement that's going to lead to sustainable and meaningful change, where all staff feel safe, supported, valued, and are able to bring their whole selves to work. To quote Simon Stevens, the NHS is part of the problem, but also part of the solution, and I truly believe that. Thank you.
Wow, just absolutely phenomenal. You just smashed that, Harpreet. That was amazing. Thank you for setting out the core components of our strategy and where we're going with this work. And, you know, picking up on what you said around the colleagues who participated in the films, I just want to say a massive thank you and a shout out to the colleagues for their bravery. And whenever I watch that film, the back of my hair stand up at the back of my head, and I feel it to my core. A really wise person posted on Twitter a few days ago that it's a privilege to learn about racism and not to experience racism. And I fully understand and express that view as well. So without any further ado, I am going to introduce our next speaker. So Ruth, if you could kindly change the slides for me. 2 years ago, before the pandemic, I was lucky to go to a conference in London, and little old me sat right in the front row, and I wasn't aware that Rob Neal, OBE, was going to be the keynote speaker for that session. And there I was, front and center, listening to Rob, and I was totally blown away. It's really difficult to introduce Rob because I kind of feel a little bit in awe, but just for colleagues in the room, brace yourself and prepare to be blown away. Rob has immense experience with regards to the race agenda. He's been a top civil servant for the past 20 years. He's been knighted on the basis of his contributions to race equality in the workplace. In addition of this, Rob is just awesome, just amazing person to bring this message home. So without any further ado, hold on to your seats. And I am going to hand over to the amazing Rob Neal to talk us through why we still need to talk about race. Over to you, Rob.
Wow. Let me start with a sound check. Can you hear me? Yep, some nods. Lovely. T, thank you so much for that wonderfully kind introduction. I wish I'm going to need a recording to take it to my mum. I want my mum to hear that, please. Thank you so much, T. I'm humbled by the introduction. It's a joy to be here. When I look at the number of people on the call, perhaps a reflection of how critically important this agenda is, how much we value this agenda, how much we are part of this agenda. I want to thank everyone on the call for being here, for arresting your busy schedules and tuning in to this milestone of a moment, an anti-racism strategy. I want to thank those that have spoken thus far. I want to thank everybody that was involved in putting the video together and for being on the video. It's the first time I've seen it in its current state. I've seen a couple of snips here and there, but you know, as was said, I think Harpreet said it best, you can't but feel something when you watch that video. And a number of you that shared on that video in such an open and honest way. I thank you. I thank all of you for the work you do. Really, my mum was a nurse for a short while. A number of my aunties led a career in the NHS, and indeed a couple of my uncles. I want to say thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you provide. Nothing more precious than life and the care you take throughout that. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, perhaps 14 now, and I hope I'm going to, provoke in a good way. I hope I'm going to inspire, and I hope it lands in a good place. I walk in faith, and so that's my prayer. It's a relatively simple one. You've done all the hard work. You're doing all the hard work. I'm really here on T's kind invitation to attempt to provoke and inspire and hopefully take us all on part of that journey in doing what we can do. Involve to evolve. Why we need to talk about race. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That was just 30 seconds in moving from one slide to the next, because it was on the 25th of May for 9 minutes and 29 seconds that the arresting officer chose to hold his knee down into the neck of George Floyd. Even though George cried out for his mother, even though George told the arresting officer that he could not breathe, perhaps with his final breath, begging for his life, the officer chose to persist, chose to take the life of another human being. And for those of us that could watch, we saw one human being take the life of another. We now know that that was over an alleged counterfeit $20 bill. I think all of us on this call would agree disproportionate force was used. We no longer have to refer to that moment as a killing or even a death. We can actually call it a murder. Why? Because a trial has been had and a verdict has been reached. And on 3 counts, Officer Chauvin was found guilty of murder. George Floyd, bless his soul. Next slide, please. Sankofa, go back to fetch it, a symbol of wisdom and learning from the past in order to build for the future. We can learn from the past. As painful as it may be, we can learn from the past. As painful as that last slide may have been, we can learn from the past. Next slide, please. It was George Floyd's murder that galvanized the world across all ethnicities, across all age groups, across gender, arrested by the scene of one human being taking the life of another as if they were an animal. And yet we know that that, coupled with the pandemic that is COVID-19, the pandemic that impacts on us all, and yet we know from published reports disproportionately impacts on Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. Those two, coupled with the lockdown, evidenced by this event today, here we are in 2D, making sense, overcoming all of the technical hitches and glitches, and well done to everyone who's working frantically beneath the waterline. Next slide, please. Because you see, all of those factors present us with this perfect storm. The perfect storm that we are all in, and yet in different boats. We start from different places. The perfect storm, George Floyd's murder, COVID-19, and the lockdown coming together to lay bare the inequalities in our society. And you see, moments don't just happen. Next slide, please. Moments don't just happen. Whether we want to look at Cynthia Jarrett in 1985, who was stormed in her own home, stormed by multiple officers who, in the exchange that ensued, killed Cynthia Jarrett. She lost her life. Out of that moment, what we know today as gold, silver and bronze command when any protest or demonstration is taking place has now been enacted. Joy Gardner, studying law at the time, from Jamaica, law student, gagged till she lost her breath in the event on an immigration ruling, lost her life in 1993. And right here in the NHS, David Rocky Bennett, diagnosed schizophrenic, caught up in a fight with another patient, administered a different set of medication, and as a result, lost his life, 1998. Zaid Mubarak was killed the night before his release at Feltham Institute, killed by his own cellmate, who was later to be discovered as a member of a far-right group. Why were they in the same cell? Rules now changed, can't happen today. And just last week, we had for the first time in over 30 years a serving police officer found guilty of manslaughter, having killed the former professional footballer Dalian Atkinson, who at the height of his game was awarded goal of the season playing for Aston Villa. Dalian Atkinson, who fell into mental ill health issues, who attending his own father's home threatened to harm his father. Police officers were called to the scene, and in the event of that exchange, he was tasered 3 times and he was hit to the head by the boot of the arresting officer, a male officer who has been found guilty of manslaughter for the first time in over 30 years. Moments don't just happen. Next slide, please. Why is this moment so important? Well, legislation tells us, the evolution of equalities legislation, no longer is it what we could do as it was in the 70s, no longer is it what we should do in the 80s and 90s. Today, we must have due regard to eliminating discrimination. We can no longer afford to ignore the impact of discrimination. Now is the time to address what really matters, to look deeper, whether our actions and decisions, our strategies, whether they condone or condemn racial inequality. It's transparency that will lead to better decision makings, better representations, better policies. Transparency. A shift in mindset is now required if we are going to create this new normal so many of us speaking of, this new future where we are more inclusive. Next slide, please. This is a movement. It's been said before we've got to this part in our agenda. It's not a moment, it's a movement, and you are part of that movement. I love what James Baldwin, the American civil rights campaigner, has to say about these intractable issues. James Baldwin, he of Giovanni's Room, he of If Beale Street Could Talk, he of I Am Not Your Negro. He says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Next slide, please. Interaction time. Pop in the chat who these 2 people are. Pop in the chat who these 2 people are. Who are they? Who are they? I'm going to hazard a guess as you pop your answers in the chat. I'm going to hazard a guess that you all know at least one of these people. But who are the other people in this image? Who are they? Do you know who they are? In the interest of time, I'm going to tell you. On the left is Rosa Parks. She of the 1954 into 55 Montgomery bus boycott. She who refused to move as instructed. Nearly 10 years later, inspired by Rosa Parks, some of you will know and recognize on the right, Paul Stevenson. He led the Bristol bus boycott right here in the UK. You see, moments don't just happen. He informed the Race Relations Amendment Act. He ensured his actions, together with those he formed a network with, extended the reach of that legislation. Paul Stevenson, Bristol bus boycott. Next slide, please. You see, we're here involved to evolve. Why? We need to talk about racism. Next slide, please. Over the past 10 years, numerous reports, over 375 recommendations, and yet still we are here. Now is the time for action, and that's why I personally commend what you're doing in NHS East of England. Next slide, please. We know that this journey is not linear because every now and again we pop up with reports that send us back in time. Because for whatever reason, they cannot find the evidence of any institutional racism. And my ask is simply this: where are you looking? What lens do you have? Maybe, just maybe, you should have gone to Specsavers. Next slide, please. Racism in 4 dimensions. The internalized, because as Verna Myers puts it, Verna Myers, she of diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. She's the one. And by the way, in case you didn't know, she's the current head of inclusion at Netflix. No coincidence there, folks. No coincidence. And if you haven't watched it already, check out her TED Talk, How to Confront Our Biases, Verna Myers. You see, she says it and puts it this way. We were all outside when the contamination came down. We were all outside when the contamination came down. And so we have internalized racism. As many of you will know, Dr. David Williams, who Yvonne Coghill and others brought to the UK in order to talk about the impact of racism on all of us. It makes us ill. It causes us to be sick. The emotional burden of microaggressions, the black tax that so many of us pay every single day of our lives is killing us. Interpersonal acts, microaggressions, leading to structural and institutional racism. Time is against me. I can't let off proper right now. Next slide, please. Just imagine what the world could have been like. Just imagine if we were critical in our theorizing about race. Just imagine if Mallory Blackman's noughts and crosses came true. What world would we live in today? If colorful leaders, if those small rooms in which big decisions are made were filled with people of color. Imagine. Next slide, please. Imagine what the headlines could have read. Imagine if we were to listen and hear when we speak of our pain and that which we have faced. I don't just mean exercise in hearing what Black people have got to say. I mean listening and hearing what's being said. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Definitions of institutional racism are with us. This taken from the Lawrence Report, the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. You see, when people turn to me and say, Rob, I don't know what institutional racism is, I say, why are you being so lazy? Go and look up the definition. Lord William Macpherson gave it to us. Bless his soul. He passed away earlier this year. He and the review gave us the definition. He moved it on from Lord Scarman, who in the early 80s, the enlightenment of the day was that one rotten apple can spoil the barrel. One rotten apple can spoil the barrel. And that is true. One racist leader can infect a group of leaders. That is true. But guess what? Guess what? 20 years later, William Macpherson and friends revealed to us that it doesn't matter which apples you put in the barrel, because it's the barrel that's rotten. The barrel is rotten, people. You've got to deconstruct the barrel, get rid of those barrel makers and bring in barrel makers who can empathize and understand the lived experience. Those who feel it, know it. Those who feel it, know it. Come on now. We take this to church right now. Next slide, please. It's a privilege to educate yourself about racism instead of experiencing it. That is a privilege. Next slide, please. So where do you stand as I begin to close out? Where do you stand? Are you a colluder? Are you a colluder? You look the other way. I can't be bothered. Not today. Not today. Not today. I've got to get home early. Not today. I'm just gonna. No, please. Please, not now, Rob. Not now, Rob. Or are you an upstander? Are you gonna fly with power? Stand in your power for this strategy where people have been brave enough to spell out what needs to be done. We are at a crossroads, my friends. We are at a crossroads. The moment of truth is upon us. Now is the time to act, to stand up and be counted. Next slide, please. Where are you on this journey in becoming anti-racist? If you haven't already, read Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. Come on now. Next slide, please. We're nearly through, folks. The zone model, becoming an anti-racist, the fear zone, the learning zone, the growth zone. Which zone are you in? Do you strive to be comfortable on these issues? Look the other way and only keep company and flex with people who think and look like you? You deny that racism is a problem? Is cognitive dissonance your challenge? Oh, that was 400 years ago. Come on, Rob, get over it now. You're not a slave. You've got privileges, Rob. You live in Harrow. Don't get me started. Don't get me started today. Next slide, please. Where do you work? Who do you work with? Where do you spend your discretionary time? When you have a choice about how and who and where you spend your time, what do you choose? Who are your friends? Who do you trust? What do you watch? Do you invite difference into your life? What does your diet look like? And I do mean the diet you consume. I do mean what you listen to. The eyes and the ears are the gateways to the soul. We do well to protect and pay attention to those. Who influences you? Next slide, please. What will you stop, start, and carry on doing to support your race equality strategy, your anti-racism strategy? What will you stop as a result of today's wonderful milestone? What will you start doing? Commit yourself to. Step up to the plate and do what needs to be done. Or as Missy Elliott puts it, get it did. I love Missy Elliott. Get it did. Next slide, please. Just two more, folks. As we reflect, next slide, please. As we reflect beyond this moment, what will we do to educate ourselves, to lift us higher, to edify, to move to a higher place, to nurture the courage to live just a bit higher than self? Akala's beautiful book that chronicles the UK civil rights movement, natives, race and class in the ruins of the empire. Check it out if you haven't already. Renee Eddo-Lodge's award-winning front cover, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Provocative title, right? The irony, of course, is that Renee is now talking to more white people about race than ever before. And more besides. The award-winning, the Oscar-winning Two Distant Strangers, bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you haven't watched it, it's 27 minutes of pure genius. 27 minutes, the best short film for the 2021 Oscars. Two Distant Strangers, available on Netflix. Check it out. In closing, involve to evolve. Next slide, please. Why it's so important for our voices to be heard, to be amplified and heard. I am keen beyond measure to ensure that we have people of colour in decision-making spaces. The question I ask of the Windrush debacle is, who was in the room when they crafted that policy? Who was in the room when they drafted that request to send home people who had come to this country to rebuild it? I can guarantee you it wasn't people that looked like me or looked like T or looked like Harpreet. We weren't in the room. And I close with this quote. Next slide, please. It's a reminder from the beautiful James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Thank you for inviting me, and I pray that what I've shared lands in an edifying place. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Wow, just absolutely amazing. Phenomenal, Rob. And you know, I hate to say this, but I told you so. You better have held on to your seat. That was just mind-blowing. Thank you ever so much. I do want to start off by just apologizing to colleagues. We have had to chat. We shut the chat box purely because we really wanted us to focus. Sorry, can colleagues please mute themselves? Thank you. We wanted you to focus in on all our speakers and just be present in the moment. So with I noticed a few hands go up. So if you could kindly pop your question in the chat box. I have a good colleague, Arthur, who will be looking at the questions on our behalf and theming them for us. So without any further ado, a massive thank you to the first three speakers, Jeff, Rob, Harpreet, phenomenal. So we're going to move this into my favourite part of the programme, which is our panel discussion. We're running a bit behind in terms of time. So just so colleagues know, I will be channeling my inner Jon Snow, and that's Jon Snow from Channel 4, not Jon Snow from Games of Thrones. With that being said, I'd like to invite Helen Taylor, Trust Board Chair for SNEFT, as well as Dr. Ed Garrett to join our panel. Welcome. I can't see Ed on the Is Ed being spotlighted?
Yeah, I'm here to.
Fabulous. So for the purposes of time, I'm going to ask our panelists to keep your responses really short and sharp. We managed to, the way we've developed our panel discussion is that we asked a range of our stakeholders for some questions to pose to the most senior leaders in the NHS here in the east of England, and they gave us a couple of questions to pose to you. So the questions have been designed to be challenging, and rightly so. And so as I begin the Q&A session, just to let everyone know, the panel discussion's focus is around leadership and taking individual and collective responsibility for this agenda. So without wasting any more time, the first question I have is for you, Ed, as the Senior Accountable Officer for Health Inequalities and Equalities for the East of England, which is why race and not any other protected characteristics? So why has the region focused on developing an anti-racism strategy? Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Tina. It's a real honour to be part of this session today and to follow just incredible speakers. So why race? I think the context has been set so powerfully, hasn't it? From Rob and Jeff and Harpreet. We've seen the global movement following the death of George Floyd. We've seen the effect of the pandemic showing what an unequal society that we've got, but the particular impact upon ethnicity, and, the exposure of the racism and prejudice that we've got in our society. And I think we thought, I mean, Anne and I were very clear that whilst the inequalities programme across the east of England is something very important, and I think we've made some excellent progress, we didn't want the issue of racism and anti-racism to be lost, and we wanted to absolutely highlight it. And I'm so proud that we have. I mean, seeing the energy that we've got here today is absolutely incredible. And there's such a call to action that the points being made by Rob that this is a great time to take on this challenge is absolutely true. I think we've seen a real shift in culture in the east of England from what I've seen, a real focus on outcomes, a real passion around equality, and a real determination to move forward. So that there's a clear call to action. And if I can leave one message today, T, it would be for all of us to use our privilege and use it positively. We've all got massive power and massive authority in different ways, and let's use it positively. And I think that is such a powerful thing if we can harness it across the region.
Thank you ever so much, Ed. And that brings me to my next question, which I'd like to pose to Helen Taylor. And the question is, what does the word privilege mean to you in the context of the conversation around race and race equality?
Thanks, Tendai. Like Ed, I'm just really glad to be here today, but feel slightly humble following our earlier speakers. For me, I think privilege is about something that you haven't earned. It just happens on the basis of a characteristic that you have or don't have. And I remember thinking about it particularly following a discussion with the wonderful Louis Horn, who in our trust chairs our Black and minority ethnic staff network, and you saw on the film earlier. But I remember Louis describing to me in her early days in this country, how many times she was asked, where do you come from? That kind of can have a bit of an edge to it, that question, probably a microaggression, but nevertheless. And me just thinking, well, that never happens to me because I'm white. People assume, they don't know where I come from, but people assume that. So it's about something that you haven't earned. And I think, you know, as leaders, we have a real responsibility to understand that, to challenge that, understand where our privilege comes from. There may be some aspects of our life where we don't have privilege, and that can help deepen your understanding. You know, certainly for me, I can think of situations where perhaps gendered assumptions have been made about, as a woman leader, am I tough enough to stand up to a particular male leader, or those type of things. So we need to understand our privilege, where it comes from, and challenge it where we see that in action.
Thank you, Helen, for that. And I just really appreciate that. So the next question I have is for Rob. And this question is a little bit of an interesting one. And the question is, how do we create a sense of belonging for our staff from the different ethnic backgrounds? And just to follow on from that question, it's a two-pronged question. And the second part of that question is, what do leaders need to do differently to counter anti-woke and divisive language around the race agenda? Oh, you're on mute.
I was disciplined enough to put myself on mute, but didn't remember to take it off. My apologies. T, who asked the question? Have we got a name?
No, we don't.
It was unknown.
It's anonymous.
Everyone's anonymous. There's so many of those anonymouses around. Anyway, to anonymous is to say, on the first question, belonging, I think it starts with safety, you know, particularly psychological safety, you know, as the extended term. I think what we do best when we do it well is create safe spaces, sometimes brave spaces, but actually encouraging all of us to say how we feel and to feel what we say and to be in those spaces together. Dare I say it, not unlike today's event, but yeah, you know, actually having and creating and building safe spaces is so fundamental. Too often I see the reverse, T. You know, I see exercises or sessions in listening, but they're couched, you know, they're even grade structured or you get limited time, or certain words are, you know, if you go through the civil service at the moment, certain words can or can't be used. So they create different ways of saying what was an old term, and suddenly if you say the wrong term, oh my goodness, it's, you know, it's the worst thing ever. I think we do better when we create safe spaces where people can be themselves, they can be authentic, or as authentic as they want to be. And then what happens, and I've seen this happen, what happens next is really quite amazing. People begin to open up and they begin to trust each other and they begin to exercise healthy challenge. Rob, you know, you said that the other day, because they know there's no backlash, because they know they can be open, because they know they can be trusted. They flex in those new spaces. They grow. And just like a child maturing, when they feel safe, when they feel trusted, when they feel they can be open, you get more. You get more of them. I worked for 8 years in employee engagement. I've seen this happen and I've seen it not happen. So that would be my response to that first question. Is the second question for me as well, T, or did you want to go around the panel? Okay.
If you could, really succinctly, how do we challenge can't say the word now, divisive language and anti-wokeness?
Well, again, I think, you know, there is this growth of what's right, what's wrong, very sort of performative, and people trying to style it out and they know the right words. And for me, and it is a personal view. I don't get these days. I mean, I'm old now. I'm 57, and I've learned the hard way on a number of things, as is life. But I do say that we need a forgiving heart. You know, we will get some of this wrong. If we keep creating these high wires and people fall off, don't be surprised if people don't try again, or people are scared of trying again. I think we need to have a forgiving heart. A lot of this we've not tried before. We've not done it. We should have done it before. We should have, but we haven't. So we are where we are. Let's move forward. Let's fit the gearbox. Let's strap ourselves in. There will be some turbulence. We will need to forgive each other as we go. We will get some of this wrong, but do you know what? We're going to get more of it right. And the rewards for getting it right will deal with the wrong stuff. And I walk in faith, and so I speak in that way. But I do believe that a better future is by us being together, active allyship, working together, because that's the way we're going to get rid of and deconstruct the racism that's in our organizations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Rob. So unfortunately, we time is not on our side anymore. So I'm going to quickly go around, just do a quick round robin. And I'll start with Jeff. Jeff, if there are any final thoughts and your personal commitment to race equality.
Firstly, I just think that I'm glad I went before Rob, not after him. That's a first observation. I think the energy and the commitment from all the participants today just gives me much more hope that we can really make a difference this time. My personal commitment is clearly I've got more knowledge about finance. I want the finance community at all levels to represent the populations that it serves. I would like to see greater representation at all levels in finance leadership. I do not want to look out on a sea of white middle-class male faces when I do talks.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that commitment, Jeff. And we're right behind you, supporting you to make sure we get that diversity in that finance community. So I'm going to go quickly on to Helen Taylor. Helen, what would be your final thoughts and your commitment towards this strategy?
Thanks, T. I think in the words of Rob earlier, I'm going to be an upstander, not a bystander. I'm going to be a visible leader on this. We've just commissioned some work with our board to help us to be better white allies. We don't want to be white saviours, or we want to do this right. And I think it's about recognising this is a personal journey as well as an organisational one. If I'm feeling too comfortable, then it's not happening. But I'm going to be recruiting 2 new non-executive directors for the trust later in the year, and I really need to find a way to make our board more diverse. It has become more diverse, but we've still got a way to go.
Thank you, Helen. Dr. Ed Garrett, your final thoughts and commitment?
Thanks, T. I mean, my commitment is to be a novice in people's lived experience. I think it's so important that leaders are shown that they're not experts, they're novices in this area. And if we really listen to our communities where the answers are, I think we'll drive some really important change. So listen and act.
Thank you, Ed. I'm going to go to Harpreet and we're going to finish off with Rob, if that's okay. So Harpreet, over to you. What your final thoughts around delivering this strategy for the region? No pressure.
No pressure. So I think my final thoughts are saying, when I first took this proposal to our senior leaders, if I'm really honest, I was ready for a fight. And don't get me wrong, it's not been smooth sailing. There's been bumps along the way, but I really found that I was pushing on an open door. So to have that commitment and the support from so many senior leaders on the panel and on the call today and elsewhere is just completely blown me away. So thank you. I think my own personal commitment is not to let this go. This is the movement that we need. So it's not going to be just me and T who do this. We need all of you behind us. So I'm going to commit to not letting it go myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Harpreet. And definitely last but not least, Rob Neal, if you could close our panel with your final thoughts.
Thank you, T. And can I echo what Harpreet has just said? I do want to thank everybody. I want to thank you for the precious work that you do, particularly in our current climate. What you do is beyond precious, actually. It is the most precious thing of all. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you do. I'm reminded, I mentioned my dad, no longer with us on this mortal coil, but somewhere else. And Dad instilled in me, I think, these words that I think are relevant for you and for today. He said this: when here a task is set for you, don't idle, sit or view it, nor be content to wish it done. Begin at once and do it.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much. I am in awe of all of you, and I am just so energized and just revved up to make sure that we deliver and land this strategy in our region, and we make such a difference, because this is about real life. It's a life and death situation. So my utmost appreciation to our panel: Helen Taylor, Dr. Ed Garrett, Jeff Buggle, Rob Neal and Harpreet Hockley. Thank you for setting the tone for our conversation this afternoon. So without any further delay, we are going to move to The awesome Roger Klein. So this is a man who I think is going to go down in NHS history. I think his groundbreaking Snow White Peaks report has just set his legacy in stone in the NHS. And on a personal level, there's no one nicer than Roger. He is just the kindest, sweetest, most lovable human being, and just so clever and just wonderful. It's always a school day when Roger's in the room, so he needs no more introduction from me. I just want to implore colleagues to get your pens out, get your notepad out and take notes, because you're going to need this. This is going to help drive this agenda forward. So without any further delay, over to you, Roger, and I hope you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Roger. Okay. Go for it.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. 6 years ago, there's no slides. I have sent some slides that could be circulated, but I'm going to speak without slides. I think you've probably had enough slides for the day. 6 years ago, I had coffee with 5 nurse managers of Black and minority ethnic heritage with a combined NHS service of about 170 years. They had discouraged their children from becoming nurses because of their own experience and treatment. Each gave accounts of repeatedly developing white nurses, only to then find that these nurses were promoted whilst they were not. And one of those nurses was my wife. We have to create the day when all Black nurses encourage their children to become NHS nurses as a great career where their talent will be valued and developed. That's the task before us. And in the last 5 years, we have seen some progress on workforce race equality in the NHS, but as COVID reminded us, it is too slow, especially in respect of career progression. So your regional anti-racism strategy is really good. It recognises this as an important and complex issue. Understanding why change is needed is important, but we're now in a moment where we need to know how to make that change. And as the data shows, we've not been very good at that. So the report that Region has commissioned from me on recruitment and career progression, which I think will be out later this month, Harpreet, we hope, and which is intended to give organisations, leaders and recruiting managers a methodology grounded in research to help shift the disparities we see. It's intended to give particularly HR directors and chief executives confidence in progressing substantial changes to business as usual in the way we handle recruitment and career progression. In considering local strategies on race equality, I always ask one question of boards and leaders. It's the one we'd ask of any proposed clinical or organisational intervention, but which we rarely ask of interventions on workforce race equality. And the question is this: can you explain why what you are proposing that we do has a reasonable likelihood of achieving its aim? And too often when I go to boards, this question is received in silence. But we're now in a moment, I think, where boards overwhelmingly want to do better and know that doing more of the same and expecting different results is not an option. So what does research suggest we need to do? And what do I summarise in this rather overlong report? What should we do? What should we not do? Not just in the NHS, but across ICS systems. So there are 2 sorts of interventions broadly that we can do. The first is positive action, to support and encourage individual staff from underrepresented groups, which I suspect includes EU colleagues in this region, through mentorship, coaching, support for professional and leadership development. And such measures, properly applied, can make a real difference to confidence and skills. And I'm pretty sure almost all employers in this region are doing some of this. But on their own, these measures will not make the difference we need to see. The second and more important approach focuses on the institutional obstacles that such staff face. The 2 approaches they're not alternatives, they should complement each other. And my review of the research seeks to set out an evidence framework to tackle those institutional obstacles. And I should say that I'm very grateful to the region, Anne, Paul, Jeff, and especially Harpreet for realising the importance of such an approach. So in summary, this is what I found. The dominant current NHS HR paradigm on recruitment and career progression has until recently largely relied on policies, procedures and training to set standards and enable individual staff to safely challenge outcomes. But in reality, few staff challenge unfair recruitment decisions, not least because they know they're almost never overturned. More importantly, a wealth of research evidence from Justin Everson and many others demonstrates that in isolation, this approach will simply not change culture and outcomes. Some examples. Carl Evan Dobbins' authoritative research on 708 American companies concluded that diversity training is the least effective way of creating more diverse senior management. Atul Alagan's EHRC review found that whilst unconscious bias training may improve managers' cognitive understanding, there was little evidence it changes decision making. Bias, both conscious and unconscious, creeps in at every stage of recruitment and career progression. It's deep-rooted and ubiquitous. I give you 4 quick examples. Norton found that when a man had more experience, people tended to hire the man because he had more experience. But when the man had more education, people decided to choose the man because he had more education. Both education and experience counted less when women had them, and something similar happens to Black and minority ethnic candidates. Greenhouse found that the achievements of Black managers were more likely to be attributed from help from others rather than their own ability or effort than were the achievements of white managers. Rivera found that recruitment panels rarely see race as a factor in their decisions, but instead use ambiguous assessment criteria to filter people out who aren't like them. So people in marginalized racial and ethnic groups are deemed more than white people to be not quite the right cultural fit or not ready for high level roles. And finally, Dhaliwala Mackay, looking at nursing, found a common failing was to prefer applicants with a faster career trajectory, helped by better acting up and secondment opportunities, even though we know that access to such opportunities is often via a tap on the shoulder. So to do better, we need to rethink much of how we recruit and how we progress careers. So here are the 6 principles I've sort of distilled from a wealth of research in 200 pages. Ruth Bonnet demonstrates that whilst we must understand the profound impact of bias, we should emphasize debiasing processes rather than wait to debias individual managers. Foschi, Valiant, a whole load of other people demonstrated that scrutiny of and being required to justify decision making can enable accountability to decisively influence in recruitment and career progression, individual decisions, panel decisions, and patterns of disproportionate impact, whilst there's extensive literature showing the benefits of goal setting. And we need to debias processes and insert accountability at each stage in a granular way. When we create a job description, how we advertise, where we advertise, appraisals, shortlisting, selection methods, how we score, how we interview, how we decide, and how we onboard staff. Carl Evan Dobbins show that organizations need to be proactive in triangulating data to create a preventative public health approach to discrimination rather than relying on individuals to challenge unfairness. And research is also clear that improved representation without inclusion is unlikely to be sustainable. So psychological safety, inclusive leadership and a just culture are also crucial. And finally, we need a robust narrative that sees tackling discrimination not just as about social justice, but it's also about improvement, not just compliance. So what does that mean in practice? So let's take some examples. Job specification. If there's too many essential criteria, that won't deter men like me who are quite happy to apply for jobs that we can't fully do. But it will deter women who tend to only apply for jobs that they're confident they can fully do. Solution, have no more than 6 essential criteria and make inclusion one of them. Stretch opportunities, such as acting up secondments and significant project involvement. These are the key to career progression, so should only be accessed not via the tap on the shoulder, but become a core part of a talent management strategy, transparently accessed and monitored for any disproportionate access or outcomes. It works. Recruitment panel decisions. On average, over time, the likelihood of men and women, Black and minority ethnic shortlisted candidates being appointed from shortlisting should be about the same. So we should start by requiring panels for 8A posts and above who shortlist women or BME candidates who are then not appointed to have to explain to a director why the successful candidate was appointed, why others were not, and be required to set out a plan for such unsuccessful candidates to do best time. All these things, by the way, are being done currently by trusts in the NHS. Disproportionate patterns of appointment. This is drawn from work in the city. Directors and senior managers should be asked to explain why such patterns may exist, and the absence of a credible explanation helped but also required to change such patterns. Research strongly suggests that such approaches, and we can apply them also to things like appraisals and performance reviews, will change behaviours and outcomes in ways that training and policies alone cannot. In passing, a similar approach, inserting an accountability nudge requiring managers to justify any planned disciplinary investigations in advance, has helped to cut the number of NHS disciplinary cases by 28% in 3 years and cut the gap between the likelihood of white and BME staff entering the disciplinary process by 2/3. Not the only contributor, but a key one. So, whilst the immediate recruitment and career progression priority is race equality, the forthcoming report also looks at gender and disability discrimination because the research overlaps in understanding how to mitigate the deep-rooted discrimination these staff also face. And I understand the framework is going to be tested with yourselves in the East of England. I'm aware of innovative work across the region. I know Jeff is doing stuff at regional finance level. I'd be really interested in the granular work looking at data in Norfolk and Norwich. I know that Patworth are really focused on inclusion and so on. And I have some confidence that other regions and the NHS nationally will embrace the sort of approach that I am suggesting research shows. So finally, a word on allyship. As white people, we have an advantage that comes with the colour of our skins, irrespective of our social status. It doesn't mean or suggest that all white people have lived easy lives without experiencing challenges, but it does mean that we have a special responsibility. Firstly, to listen with attention to those who experience discrimination, put ourselves in other shoes, and be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations with those colleagues. And secondly, specifically in respect of race, we have to become more than non-racist, become anti-racist, intervening as active bystanders if we notice microaggressions, hear racist comments, or witness unfair recruitment and career decisions. Doing so will make it clear we are really serious about everything else I've suggested today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. And I'm so pleased that the East of England will be the landing site for implementing some of this fantastic research that you've managed to pull together. So without further ado, we're going to move into another panel discussion. And I'm going to kindly ask my colleagues to open up the chat box. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to absorb what Roger has outlined in terms of the research. And we're going to invite several colleagues onto the panel. The first person I'd like to welcome to the panel is Una Monkhouse, who is co-chair of our regional HRD network, which is our Human Resources Directors Network. I don't know, that's a mouthful, but I think I've got it in one. I'd like to welcome Marcus Riddell to the panel as well. Marcus is the National Head of Equality and Inclusion at NHS England and Improvement for Evidence and Policy. So he's from our national team. Hello, Marcus. And we've also got Alex Anyanwu, who is the BME Network Chair for Princess Alexandra Hospital. I think, Harpreet, you're joining the panel as well. So like I said before, it's going to be short, sharp answers, please, so we can cover as much ground as possible. And I guess the first question is to both Roger and Marcus, which is, now we've had 6 years worth of RES data. What are the lessons learned? And in what ways should we be using the RES to accelerate change in the NHS? So if I can start with you, Roger.
So, the RES, which was drawn on an evidence-based base itself, I think has succeeded in highlighting the challenge that we face. But I think we spent too long in the particularly last period, too long trying to convince people why we need to make progress, and we haven't paid enough attention to how we can make it. And I think that's the challenge going forward. I know that's what Anton, who's leading on the RES now, wants to do. And I think we just need to give chief execs, HR directors, chairs of BME networks, etc., confidence that if they do the sorts of things that I'm suggesting, there is a better likelihood of achieving the results we want. Unfortunately, many of the things that are being done at the moment, with the best of intention, were never likely to move the dial in the way they should.
Thank you, Roger. So over to you, Marcus. Same questions. 6 years worth of data. What now with the RES?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, well, I don't disagree with anything Roger said. I mean, the RES has shone a spotlight on race in a way that most institutions have been unable to. But the data on its own doesn't shift anything. And that's really obvious now after 6 years. We've had minimal progress. The data on its own does nothing. So what Roger's saying is absolutely right. I mean, there's lots of things we can do to kind of accelerate this, and some of them we are trying now. So, for example, I think the RES is it's big, and there are a lot of organisations that are bad on all of the indicators, and you can't in 1 year turn around all of the indicators. So we're making a lot of effort to make it a bit more bite-sized. We've also got to think about, touching on Roger's earlier presentation, about making it practical and practicable. So some of this is just hard to do, and we need to be much better at a national level, and certainly what you and Harper did at regional level, in terms of showing people what actually can be done. This is not an impossible piece of work or an impossible challenge. We've just come through a pandemic. There's something about the will, but there's also about the practice. It's hard. So we've got to show people, we've got to show them how to do it. And then the last thing I would say to you on this is, there's a real connection between performance, targets, and accountability, and it's kind of a loop that we haven't quite closed, and I think we're now trying to close it. So in terms of performance, we would assume here and think and know in some of our organisations that there is a connection between poor performance and RES indicators and other things. We're now starting to expose that nationally on things like vaccination uptake. I think that's a really important piece of work. We've obviously got representation targets, of course, as well, and targets always kind of set the mind, focus the mind. But more than that, you also have to have accountability. You've got to have a feeling amongst not only senior leaders, but also middle managers, that they have to do this, or there will be a repercussion of not doing it. So there's lots we can do to speed this up, and some of it we're doing now. But I would agree with Roger that you could argue that we've done some good work, made some good progress, but we haven't shifted the dial yet, and then now we need to shift it.
Thank you very much, Marcus. So you said you landed some really important points, which leads me nicely onto my next question, which is for Una. And I think, Roger, you might want to just come onto this. But the question is, we often hear that it's our middle managers who are truly the makers or breakers of culture in the organisation. They either create opportunities or they create barriers for people's progression. And I guess for you, Una, as a HRD and as chair of the HRD network, in what way should we be working with middle managers to help them to recognise the impact of their actions that perpetuate inequality and discrimination in our organisations? And Roger, I'd love to hear from you as well on that. But if I could just say, health warning, if you could keep your responses really succinct.
Okay, thanks, Tende. I think what I say is that sort of middle managers have a really difficult role, particularly in the NHS, juggling lots of agendas. They're often clinical and managerial leadership roles. And my experience is that this is often an area where they feel underconfident and they feel they don't know what to do. They think it's best left to experts they don't really fully understand or see how that it should be part of their leadership responsibilities in order to address issues and to promote this kind of culture and look at their practices. And so I think what we've talked about in the HRD network is one, I think the first thing is about line managers understanding fully the scope of their roles, the impact they have, the impact of, you know, where they spend their time. People watch this kind of thing, don't they? We all look at what people do rather than what they say. And so people make, you know, judgments when they see where line managers spend their time and who they spend their time with. So we need to help them understand the impact that they can have, and that is their responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the EDI lead or HR department or the board. It needs to be theirs. And then we need to provide them with the skills and the ability to and provide them with the training so that they're confident and capable in what they're doing.
Thank you, Una. So Roger, if you could quickly just touch on that. So middle managers and their role.
So I agree with you, Una. The evidence is really clear on this. As far as we can, this should be something that isn't done to frontline managers, but is done with them. So clear expectations of what the organisation expects, but they're entitled to expect support of the sort that Una's started to touch on. If we don't do that, there's a risk of a lot of pushback. If we do it properly, you can carry them with you. There's a wonderful research report called Rage Against the Cage by Frank Dobbin, which I advise people to read. It just makes that point really clearly.
Thank you, Roger. So I'm going to move on to Alex. Alex, so you're a chair of a BME network at your organisation, and I'm sure you work with other colleagues and peers and counterparts. And I guess the question I have for you is, it's obvious that the role of the BME networks is becoming, and other networks, critically important in terms of people who influence the culture and who are a key stakeholder in an organisation. I guess what we wanted the question we have for you is, in your experience, what are some of the barriers that staff network chairs are having to overcome, and what support do organisations need to start to put in place to support networks to operate more effectively?
Thanks, Tendai. And I don't know how much time you've got for this, but just to start, just to keep, I know. Okay. So first thing for us will be time. Yeah. Also lack of support from the leadership team. We need an organizational structure with somebody that understands the culture of racism, why we have it, why it's flourished for so many years, and who is willing to fight against it. We also need, when I say fight, is fight against it by talking about it in every intervention that they have with the wider organization. Not just having somebody at the top of sponsoring the inclusive and diversity who is not willing to take the pressure and the challenge. It's a vulnerable position to be, and we just need somebody that is going to put themselves out there in this vulnerable position and start the talk and acting on the talk. I think we've done a lot of talking with management. We've done a lot of talking trust-wide, nationally. We just need action. It's time now for action.
Thank you so much, Alex. So I think I could squeeze one more question, and if on the back of that last question I squeeze in, if we could just round robin final thoughts and your personal commitments to our race strategy in the East, as well as race equality as a whole. And I guess the last question I have is really posed for Una, actually, which is, can you outline very clearly for colleagues and I guess your regional counterpart what the role of the HR director is in driving this agenda forward?
Okay, I mean, we all have different roles, so it's been touched on by a number of the kind of central role of having the leadership of the chief exec, but in most organisations, and I think it does sit here, it's the role, I think, of the director of workforce to drive this agenda, to set the agenda, to ensure that the organisation understands its RES data, its WDES data, understands the experience and of its staff, has the mechanisms in place so that there's an opportunity for staff to raise concerns. So all that kind of infrastructure stuff about making sure that the voices staff are heard and the experiences staff are heard, and that the data is there, and then setting the framework and setting the direction. So I think sometimes it can be a bit of confusion about what's the role of the BAME network and what's the role of the workforce director, and I'm completely clear that they are complementary but very different. The responsibility and the accountability for the culture and for addressing racism in organisations sits with workforce, sits with the board. The BAME network I see there as being there to ensure that we hear the voices of staff, particularly those from a BAME background, about what it feels like to work in the hospital and to co-create with us some of the ways of addressing that. But the accountability sits with me, us.
Thank you. So just to summarise, I think it's quite clear the word accountability has come up quite a number of times. So what we're saying to people is we're moving the space of delivering this race equality agenda to be everybody's accountable responsibility. So I'm just going to go round robin. I'll start with Marcus. Final thoughts and your commitment to supporting our anti-racism strategy.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to the panel. So maybe I'll just mention three things then. What I'd like to kind of feel different. I think obviously we need the NHS in its most senior roles to look different, but it also needs to feel different. That's about staff experiences, but it's both about what we measure and what we don't measure. There's a lot of intangibles here. So I've worked for ministers, I've worked in counterterrorism. I used to run a charity. I've only been in the NHS for a couple of years. Every single job I've stepped into, I've had to bring body armor with me. You have to prepare yourself for what's coming. You spend your whole time in the organization negotiating and navigating, being black in that organization. Wow. So what I want that to stop. I just want to be me. I just want to get to a job and be me. And I know there's thousands, millions of people who feel the same way as me. It just needs to feel different. So I'm not saying we're going to do that now in the next year. We're going to turn everything around. It's going to be fine. But what I am saying is we need to be ambitious enough to say we don't want to cope with this and kind of struggle along with it and be okay. We want it to stop. So that's my ambition and also my commitment to everyone here that I'm going to try and help do this from a national level. Thank you, C.
Thank you, Marcus, and I felt that. So over to you, Alex. Final thoughts and last messages. Oh, I think you're on mute, Alex.
So from me, it will be consistent commitment from senior leadership and BMA staff ability to speak up. Like Rob shared with us this afternoon, don't be a bystander, stand up and speak up for yourself, because only then would we change the narrative.
Thank you, Alex. Short and sweet. And lastly, but not least, sorry, Harpreet, I've taken it for granted. So I'm going to go to Roger to just close this panel discussion off. Final thoughts, Roger.
Sometimes in the last few years, I felt that really well-intentioned people were a bit like someone sort of trying to navigate the London Underground with a map of the Paris Metro. I want people to do things that they can have some confidence are likely to work, because we have a moment and we have to seize it. And if we don't, the moment may go.
Thank you, Roger. That is so powerful. So we have to, and it's very similar to the quote that Rob left us about you can't change anything unless you face it straight head on. Right. So I'm going to move us on to our next section. We had intended to have an open mic session where we would invite colleagues from across the region to just share your personal commitments, but time has just eluded us this afternoon. So what we've decided to do is we're going to kindly ask colleagues if you'd prepared your pledge slide around your commitment, your personal commitment, please email them into the team. What we will be doing is we'll be publishing them on our social media platforms, as well as part of our community of practice platform, the Futures Collaborative platform. Will have all the organisations in the East and individuals who've made a public pledge. We'll publish them on those websites. So without any further ado, I am so excited for this bit, because I get to have a quick conversation just to round us up, and a real reflective conversation with two of my favourite people in the East of England, and that's Anika Patrick Redhead and Louis Horn, amazing shining stars. So if I can invite Louis and Anika to the floor. So I guess this is about just kind of thinking about the past 7 months since we did the filming, and the work that you've been involved with behind the scenes in helping to shape and deliver this strategy for the region. And I guess the first question I have for you, Louis, is what's been going on since you did the filming?
Gosh, hello everyone. It's been an amazing afternoon, and thank you. I'm very privileged to be part of this. So since the filming, you know, I've been friends with everyone, including Onika. So I feel I'm now braver in speaking out, and mirrors to any departments, any managers that I hear of. If I hear an ethnic minority member of staff who's been, you know, turned down 4 or 5 times, because we still have that now, and without no effective feedback, and not given the tools onto how they can break those ceilings. And, you know, nationally, as part of Filipino Nurses Association, we put ourselves out there to all NHS staff from the diverse community background to come to us, and we try and mentor them how to do these barriers and, you know, have a ripple effect on how they can be more empowered. And I think what will make the most difference is the engagement. I know everyone has said it, but, you know, from a practical sense, being on the front line is the engagement and support from trust boards. You know, from looking at the REST annual data, we're all talking about the REST data, but actually to look at it, action it, and then evaluate the improvement year after year. It doesn't stop with just the report. Anti-racism is everybody's business. You know, it's a well-researched fact that an inclusive organization has better patient outcomes. So I think the next one for all of us to do to get us into a place where diverse people are actually celebrated in NHS is, for us, silence doesn't work anymore. You know, for ethnic minorities, you know, as a BAME lead and a senior matron, we all have this enormous responsibility to actually tell our colleagues that we belong, that you can get the promotion as well as the next person, but you have to believe it and you have to act on it. You know, we should do more. This is great, this strategies like this, and we should push for embracing diversity agenda like this in the true sense of the word. I am aware that we're talking about it and we're listening, NHS is talking and listening, but like everyone said, it's time to act now. And thank you very much.
Oh, awesome, Louis. Thank you very much. So, Onika, tell us, how has the journey been in the past 7 months? What's made the biggest difference to your experience? And, you know, it goes without saying, in the filming, nobody can watch what you shared and not feel uncomfortable. And so thank you for the bravery of sharing your experience. And I just want to honor that. But I know lots has shifted in the past 7 months. So can you just give us a little whistle-stop tour in things that have made a difference?
Yeah, so what I think has made a difference is definitely being brave to speak up. I think I've always said about myself that I am a brave person, but not until something like this actually happens to you, like when you have a physical thing. And there was, you know, of course, the video was edited, so there was so much, I think 2 hours long of footage. But you know, it was hard to speak up even when it happened, because you have that self-doubt constantly about, did it happen? Did I do the right thing in the moment? But what's happened? So I moved trusts, and what is happening now is that the organization that I'm working in is allowing me to take up space in a way that I should have been there anyway for everybody. And I appreciate that. They haven't boxed me in, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in the organization. I'm saying it because they really allowed me to be me. And of course, they didn't know any of the background stuff that was going on. So they didn't understand the motivation and my, you know, around any of the things that I'm doing. But I'm also trying to implore people to take personal responsibility and to educate themselves around it. So around every single thing around EDI, but especially anti-racism. Yeah, so big changes, but yeah.
Onika, just lovely to hear from you, and I'm so pleased. Both these colleagues are so humble in their leadership. I know Louis is just full throttle, going for it. She's being mentored by Ruth May. I know Anik has just recently taken up a new appointment, a new senior level appointment, but I'm not one to spill people's business in this.
I didn't want to say.
I wait for you to formally announce that, but just to say thank you for your support, and all the colleagues, Ashton, Sam Fuller, all of you for your massive support in terms of helping us to shape and deliver this agenda. So without any further ado, we've got bang on time now. I'm going to cross over and invite Harpreet back to just round up the session and to give our vote of thanks. So back to you, Harpreet.
Thank you, T. So I just want to do a quick check-in from where we were this morning around Menti. But actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make sure we finish on time. So I would rather you fill out the evaluation form. So there's going to be a link in the chat box. Fill out the evaluation form. Ruth, can we just move to the resources slide, please? So we have produced some helpful resources for all you colleagues who want to join us on this journey. There'll be a link in the chat box to our future site. If you're a member already of the platform, you should be able to follow it and subscribe. But if not, we'll also pop our email address in there. So just drop us a note and we can arrange access for you. So what I will say, it's a space that we're going to keep adding to as more resources become available. But it's also a place where you can share the work that you're doing that you think was going to be helpful for others. So like I said earlier, achieving a critical mass of people working towards this goal is really what's going to make the difference. So just in closing, I want to give a huge thanks to our wonderful speakers and our panel members, who I really hope you found as enlightening as I have. I also want to say a massive thanks to the team who have pulled this together. So Ruth, Arthur, Fernanda, and my amazing Tendai. So without your support, we really wouldn't have got this far. So please do give us your feedback. We'll drop the evaluation link in the chat box. We really do want to hear from you, and we need to hear from you. And please keep sharing your pledges and your commitments with us. To reiterate what Rob said earlier, we can't let this be a moment. It really has to be a movement. So thank you to everyone, again, from the bottom of my heart, for joining us today, for your support, your enthusiasm and your commitment. I really can't thank you enough. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, lots of claps and lots of applause. Well done, Harpreet. We finished with a minute to spare.
Woo! I definitely don't want to be late. I definitely don't like finishing late.
Oh, well done.
T, you're like a force to reckon with timings.
Isn't
it? Do you know what? I need to think about that, because I'm really militant, even in family situations. Like, I am 3 hours early when I have to take a plane. They always hate me when I organise like parties and stuff, because I'm like, if I say 2, I mean 2. You are not getting fed. If you turn up at 2:30, you will not be fed.
Tendai, tell us the truth. You mean 1:30, really, don't you?
Are we having a debrief?
I want people to be on it.
I'm just checking in. Are we having a debrief?
If the speakers don't mind staying on, is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Got a few people.
I'm going to scram. Unless you don't need me to stay, do you?
No, you're good, Roger. You go. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Roger.
Cheers. Well done, everybody.
200 pages.
Thank you.
Roger, you better crack on.
We're on it.
I love you, really.
Okay.
Thank you.
The chat has just gone crazy.
The chat and that's why we had to shut it down, because we knew that we wouldn't. It's pling, 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 pling all day.
Oh my gosh. Well, they're all nice comments. That's good. Okay. I think I can't see. Can anyone see how many people we've got left on? If we've still got
29. So we might need to remove people. I think we can. If Fernanda and Ruth, can you help me to remove people?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
I'll start from the bottom.
Yeah, it managed to crash my computer a couple of times. That's how much action was going on in the chat box.
Choice words there, Arthur.
Tendai, Harper, I'm going to leave you now, but it's been a privilege to be part of that. But well done, great event. I've just got a meeting with our chief nurse now, so
thank you
thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, I'm going to catch up with you soon. See you soon, Louis.
Yes, we will.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
I think that's everybody out now.
I think so.
Yeah.
So this is a safe space now, I think.
Yeah.
I am so sorry, Geraldine, Sam. Just
please. There's nothing to be sorry about. That was just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So please, no need for apologies. But I don't think I would have been worthy in that space. It was just absolutely amazing.
Oh, thank you, Geraldine. You are worthy, by the way. We really do value your help and support. It's just the open mic section. I just.
We had all those technical stuff at the beginning, so it just kind of threw us right at the beginning. But luckily, we had a backup. So
yeah. So Marcus got a few comments in the chat box. I saw someone posted.
Marcus,
nice to see a young black man doing this at a senior level.
Marcus is trending.
Always. Marcus is people like him at My Trust, you know.
Yeah.
Geraldine, I was going to say I think we could also have Marcus's support, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, with our CNO work program and our AHP stuff around RES. That would be really helpful, Marcus, if you could support us once we.
Yes, I would welcome the gift of Marcus. Thank you.
You might regret saying that, Geraldine. Might regret that. No, of course, I'm happy to help.
She does not let anyone get away without an action.
Sam, what did you think of the event? I'm really keen to hear your thoughts.
I think I'm never allowing you to make me wear a tie again.
I know.
I thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was brilliant. And the thing that...
Sorry to interrupt your debrief. It's still recording in case you want to stop it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I tell